Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar of the Spain-US Chamber of Commerce. And we have today a very special guest, which is Pancho Campo, that is here with me from Marbella. Hello, Pancho. How are you?
Hello, Juan Carlos. And yes, I am in Marbella. I am in Spain in confinement, like many other people around the world. And it's a great pleasure to be with you guys. And thank you so much to the Spain-US Chamber of Commerce for the invitation and the opportunity of sharing my experience with the people that might be following today this webinar.
Thank you, Pancho. So for all of you that doesn't know Pancho, he's a former tennis professional at ATP Tour. He was the captain of the Chilean tennis Olympic team in Barcelona '92. He's also an entrepreneur who has managed his own marketing and event management company for the last 30 years. And he's also a speaker in motivation, event management, and climate change events. And today we are here to talk a little bit about stress and stress management and how can we outcome these situations that every day in our lives we encounter stress situations, and now these days a little bit more. So that's the purpose of our today's webinar. So Pancho, to start a little bit talking about these circumstances that are around us today, you studied medicine. So give us an update about the coronavirus and its consequences. A brief overview, if you like.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, for the introduction. I'm not going to talk too much and in depth because I think people have seen a lot in the in the news and televisions and different online magazines. But I would like to remind people that when you analyze a crisis like the coronavirus, you got to look at it from 4 points of view. First of all is the science, and the science is clearly telling us that is a virus that is completely unknown. It has never infected humans, and therefore there's no antibodies in the population. Everybody is susceptible to get the disease, and we should listen to the scientists. Second, we got to look at this problem from the economic point of view, and we all are already seeing effects of the pandemic in the economy around the world. People are losing lots of jobs, the companies are shutting down, and I think it's going to have a tremendous impact. The third angle that you have to use to analyze a crisis like this is the political angle. We have politicians from all colors and kinds, from people that have reacted very quickly and very strongly to other politicians and world leaders that kept on denying the disease. So this is a cause of a stress for the economy. The fact that not all the world leaders are acting according to what the health authorities are suggesting. And last but not least is the social impacts that this crisis is having on families that have been confined. For example, in Spain, people live in small apartments. Imagine 50 square meters, families with 4 and 5 members. Other families that have lost loved ones and did not have the opportunity to accompany them in their last minutes of life, and of course they couldn't go to the funeral. And the social consequences that this crisis is going to have after we find hopefully a solution. So those are the 4 angles that I like to study, which coincide with the 4 sources of stress and the sources of balance that I will describe further on in this webinar. Now, one thing I would like to say before I finish with this point, we have to understand that until we don't have a vaccine available and people being vaccinated around the world massively, we cannot think about going back to normality. So we have ahead of us a very tough time in all those 4 areas that I described.
Yes, thank you indeed, and I agree on that as well. And yes, today everybody, it's or most of the population around the world is experiencing similar circumstances. Some lockdown, many people not going to work and to job. So the normal person, it's now experiencing higher levels of stress than regularly. But in your life, during your life, you had your own important levels of stress throughout your life, which have helped you design your motivational speeches and seminars and your techniques and methods. So tell us a little bit more about that and those experiences, please.
Yeah, I decided to share my experience because, although I have been a very lucky man in my life, I got a great family, great kids and wife, my relatives in the Canary Islands that I'm sure that they're listening to this webinar. I say hello to them. But I have been unfortunate to go through several episodes that have been quite stressing for me and my relatives. I'm going to mention the three that have affected me the most. And from those experiences, I have drawn some of the conclusions that, because they helped me and they helped my family, I thought, it was nice to share it with more people. Back in 1984, I had finished studying medicine, the whole career, and I was doing some internship in Barcelona, the Hospital Clínico de Barcelona, waiting to go back to the Dominican Republic. It was an American university in the Caribbean. I was just pending on traveling back to the Dominican Republic, attend the graduation ceremony, and pay the final tuition, and I would become a doctor. The day that I called the university asking when the ceremony was going to take place, I was informed that the military had raided that morning the university, and they have burned all the administration department. Now, let's keep in mind that back in 1984, there were no computers. So everything was in paper. And because, that administration office went up in flames, I lost all my records. And basically in a couple of days, I went from being a doctor to having nothing. And that marked my life, and that has been a chip on my shoulder for many, many years. That forced me to go back to tennis. And because I had not been competing for a while, that forced me to become a tennis coach. Luckily, I was successful, but I wanted to be a doctor. I didn't want to be a tennis coach. After a few years, I managed to come to terms with the fact that I was not going to be a doctor. I had a very successful company in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. But if we all remember, the tragic attacks on the Twin Towers in New York, it was devastating for the whole world, but especially for people like me that were living in the Middle East. We did a big mistake, which I haven't done in this case. I should have frozen my company until we knew how the situation was going to develop. So I lost a lot of money. I got into a lot of debt. And when I managed to pay the debt, my wife and I decided to go back to Spain, to come back to Spain. 2 years after returning to Spain, I found out that a former partner of ours, a minority partner, she had less than 30%, because she did not accept that money had been lost in this episode, filed a complaint against me. It was a misdemeanor and of an economical nature. But the worst was that she managed to put my name in Interpol with a red notice. For those of you who are listening who do not understand what a red notice is, it's like, in the far west, when you had, wanted, you had that picture of you with a wanted sign. You cannot travel, you cannot enter a lot of countries. You can see that was published in the website. How tragic this was for me and my family. First, to know that you're wanted for something that you didn't do. Second, we couldn't travel around the world, so basically we were confined. Luckily, we were confined in Spain. It's a big country, and I could travel to most countries in the Schengen community in Europe, but I couldn't travel to the United States. And of course, my reputation was completely destroyed. Luckily, all this came to a good end, but I had to be dealing with this problem for almost 15 years. In December 2018, Interpol issued a report proving that I was 100% innocent of all the claims. but finding guilty the United Arab Emirates of breaching 5 of my rights: judicial rights, civil rights, and even human rights. And when you think that you have overcome that, you think that nothing else can happen in your life, that was enough stress. And last year, while I was traveling to South Africa, we were organizing a large summit about water and climate change with Arnold Schwarzenegger as the keynote speaker. One night, going from a private residency back to my hotel, I ordered an Uber, and I got kidnapped by 2 guys that made themselves look like they were Uber drivers, but they were not. So I was kidnapped. I was retained for approximately 5 or 6 hours, and I was left in the middle of nowhere, very far away from the city, with no money, with no telephone, with no nothing, and that was quite scary. Luckily, I have been able to handle the stress I think, in quite a good manner, because my own stress is what prevented me from being a good tennis player. And when I became a coach, and when all this thing about medicine happened, I decided that I was going to train my players from the mental point of view, but I was going to become mentally tough. Be careful what you wish for. So that's the story of my life, and a lot of the conclusions and a lot of the experiences that I share with the audience when I do speeches or seminars. It's drawn from my own experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because and those different episodes in your life happen at a very different age. So the older that you were, probably you had more tools to come out from those situations. But at the beginning, probably was more stressful and more difficult to come at. But tell us a little bit, what is the basis of your method or the tools that you use to overcome stress?
The basis of the method that I use to try to help people in excuse me, in my seminars and in my book, which is called Inspírate, Be Inspired, it's three legs. In the one hand is the personal experience that I just explained to you. Second is my experience as a tennis coach. We were the original coaches. Today there's life coaches, business coaches, everybody calls themselves a coach, but we were the original coaches, because a coach, when you travel around the tour, has to help somebody that is already performing at a very high level, who wants to perform even better. But you gotta coach them not only from the tennis point of view and physically. You have to help them emotionally. You gotta travel with them. You gotta give them advice on what to eat, how to relax, how to sleep, etc. But in my profession, at the end of the day, I am an entrepreneur, and my company has been organizing large events, concerts, summits, conferences with a lot of big celebrities, such as President Barack Obama, Vice President Al Gore, Kofi Annan, Andre Agassi, lots of very famous names, which have taken part in my events. But I have taken the advantage of having them next to me, and I have maintained conversations with most of these celebrities, and I clearly asked them. For example, when I was working with Vice President Al Gore, I asked him, Mr. Vice President, what did you do to deal with your emotions and the stress of losing the elections? Or when I was, we were about to go on stage with Sting. In the backstage, I realized that he likes to do yoga and meditation, and I know this because as he was coming in Spanish, he said, "Hola Pancho, ¿cómo está?" And he said, "Would you be so kind to get me a carpet and some candles, because I like to do a little bit of yoga and some meditation before I go on stage." So this is the third leg of my method. I've been very honored and very lucky to have dealt with these people and have the chance to ask them, what have they done to deal with the stress, to deal with nervousness, and to be more productive.
Thank you. That's our great experiences that you had. And also, I would like to remember our audience, if anyone would like to ask a question, you will find in your right hand panel a panel where it says questions. You can write there your questions, and we will try to answer them during the webinar. So, Pancho, what first tips would you give to people who are having a bad time with the coronavirus confinement these days?
This is a very stressful situation. I explained to you because it affects all areas of our life. It affects us emotionally, the relationship we have with our relatives at home, with our kids. It affects our jobs. It affects us economically. So the first the first recommendation that I apply to myself and my family is choose very carefully your sources of information, because when this whole thing started, we were stuck to the television all day reading news in Facebook and different online magazines. And there's so much rubbish out there, and there's so much fake news or things that are not fake but have been taken out of context or exaggerated, that this can really get to you. It can really make you think, oh my God, the world, this is not only a pandemic, this is Armageddon. So I would strongly recommend people, to stay away from reading fake news. Choose very carefully one or two sources of information that are reliable, and don't spend the whole day reading everything that falls into your lap. I personally read the Journal of the American Medical Association. I go to the website of the World Health Organization, and once a day, only once a day, I watch at the news, mostly Spanish news, because I want to know what's the situation here. The second tip that I would give people, most leaders with whom I have had conversations, and myself, we all try to find in moments of stress inspiration. It could be, you can be inspired by music. You could be inspired by a world leader. You could be inspired by an artist. But you could also be inspired by a poem. And I would like to share with the audience here uh, a movie that I strongly recommend you to watch. It's extremely inspiring while you are in confinement. It's called Invictus. And Invictus is the story of the first World Cup hosted by South Africa, uh, and the first time that Nelson Mandela, played by Morgan Freeman, met with Francois Pienaar, played by Matt Damon. In that conversation, Nelson Mandela asks Francois Pienaar or Matt Damon, Francois, tell me, how do you inspire your players to be better? What do you do to lead them? And he said, Mr. Mandela, I use I lead them by example. Mandela replies, very good. In my case, when I was in Robben Island, and Robben Island, it's one of the toughest prisons in the world. I had the honor of visiting his cell. And he says, when I was in Robben Island thinking that, I couldn't stand up, I was abused physically and verbally. And when, my strength was at its weakest point, I had a poem that inspired me. And imagine how powerful can be a poem that allowed Nelson Mandela to overcome prison for 30 years. And when he came out, he became one of the most respected world leaders in the history of humankind, and he changed South Africa for good. Now, I would like to make an exercise with the audience. I want everybody that is listening to me to think about the following. Imagine that you are in South Africa. Imagine that you are a black leader with, a very tough apartheid. Imagine that you are in a cell that it's like a, box of matches. You don't have a mattress. Imagine that you have been doing works outside under the sun, heavy works, and that you have been abused verbally, physically. You have not given any food, and it's the time for you to go to your room. And when you think that everything cannot get any worse, you think about a poem. Now think about all that. Imagine for 20 seconds that you are Nelson Mandela, but do me a favor. Please do it with your eyes closed and listen carefully to the words of this poem that inspire such a great leader. And it goes like this. Out of the night that covers me, black at the pit from pole to pole. I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. So that is a very powerful poem if you keep into consideration that gave so much inspiration to Nelson Mandela to become who he became. If we are in confinement, we know that we're going to go through very difficult times. Find inspiration in maybe your parents. Maybe you have relatives that are on their own dealing with the situation. Maybe you have some music that you like to listen at certain time of the day when you know you're going to be down, or a movie. You know, it doesn't have to be a world leader, but inspiration is one of the key elements to start overcoming tough situations.
Well, those are great advices, and I find myself inspiration in music. That's what I use for that. So we have one question regarding the information sources that you mentioned before. So our friend Rene Frank asked us, how much do your international network mean to you to get input?
Well, first of all, you know, Rene is in South Africa, and that's great that you have joined us tonight. Rene knows very well what happened in South Africa with me because he is my partner there, and he's the person organizing this big conference. Rene, you know, you have to follow certain international news because, you know, we are in a globalized world. And for example, we in Spain will be very affected if the economy in the United States or China gets really, really bad and they fall not only into a recession, but a depression. I have two sources of information in my telephone. One is the New York Times and the other one is the BBC. Those are my two sources of information as journals or as newspapers. But as I said before, most of my information when it comes to the coronavirus, I get it from medical publications, maybe because of my medical background. I don't know if that answers your question, but thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you. And we have another question. It's mentioning about public health is not just curing diseases; it's also mental health as well. And the question is, don't we have to reopen the economy with sensible social distancing to limit the mental health damage? John Kelch.
Thank you, John, for the question. You know, there's a very strict protocol that most countries are going to follow to overcome the coronavirus and try to take us back to normality. These four phases. We are in phase one at the moment. Before we can go to phase two, we have to make sure that the number of infected patients and the number of deaths has decreased for 15 days in a row in a considerable manner. And to move from phase two to phase three, it is mandatory or almost mandatory that we have a vaccine, and that vaccine has been inoculated in at least 1 or 1.5 billion people around the world. Now, I think our health system should provide counseling for people that are in confinement via online, because this virus, it's a rogue. You know, we have never seen something like this in the history of medicine. You know, a virus that is behaving so erratically. So I understand completely where you're coming from, but unfortunately, in our country, if we would have started confinement much earlier, we wouldn't have the number of deaths that we have. You know, we have much more deaths than the United States proportionally to our population. We are 46 million. You guys are 320 something million. I hope that answers your question and that could provide some light on that point of view.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So moving forward and going a little bit more for the practical side here, how can you or how can we best deal with being locked up? Give us some specific advices that we could follow that came from your experiences.
I already mentioned two things, your sources of information, and also you have to have something that inspires. That's like the basis of what you can do. Now, it is very important that we don't forget that being in confinement is not being on holidays. At the beginning of the confinement, a lot of people started waking up at, the late hours of the morning. They were up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, having bottles of wines on gin and tonics. We gotta understand that, we have to have discipline. And discipline, I like the definition of discipline that the Japanese businessman used. Japanese people say that to have discipline, first of all, you have to be organized. And being in confinement, you have to be organized when it comes to the way you eat, the way you dress. A lot of people have been in pajamas for so many days, and they have not shaved, and that's totally the contrary of what you are supposed to do. You have to stay organized. Number two, punctuality. Punctuality in business is key. Punctuality in sports is very important. Now, punctuality in pandemic, it's also very important. You gotta wake up in the morning at a decent hour. You gotta have your lunch, your dinner, and your hours of sleep with that organization, but also with punctuality. And the last part of this definition of discipline used for the Japanese, it's hygiene. Usually, we don't worry about physical hygiene. We take a shower and we dress nicely, and that's enough. But in these days, we gotta look at hygiene from 2 points of view. Number one, it's our physical hygiene. We gotta maintain the distance. We gotta wash our hands. If you go shopping, you gotta make sure that you clean all those shopping bags and everything you bring to your house. But also it's mental hygiene. Number one, cleansing. Get rid of all the negativity of social media. Get rid of any negativity that you might have. A lot of people are doing Zoom or web conferencing. Avoid talking to people that the only thing they're going to bring to the conversation is conspiracy theory, negativity. That's number one. The second one is what I call rituals. And rituals are what is also known as, in ancient times, war dances. The dances that the Indians of the Maori warriors performed before they went to a battle. These rituals are things that you do that concentrate your energy. They allow you to save that same energy, and they prepare you for the battle. I think we have a short video that we can show them, no, Juan Carlos?
Yes, we have some videos about the rituals for sports.
Yeah, if you look at this is Djokovic, how he bounces the ball endless times before he's going to serve, and on the other side of the court is Roger Federer moving from one side to another one. Now, this is Rafa Nadal. See how meticulously he places the bottles in the change of the sides. But before he's going to serve, you have all seen him playing. He bounces the ball many times. He cleans his face. He takes his pant from his backside. And this image here, these are war dances. This is called the haka. This is the dance that the New Zealand All Blacks perform every time they're going to play a match. Why rituals are so important? Because it gives us a sense of determination and a sense of direction. If you look at sports people, if you look at Djokovic and you look at Nadal, you will see that not only they perform those rituals in moments of stress. Let's say they are 4-4 in the last set. They even exaggerate those rituals. You have to have rituals when you are at home. You have to have rituals when you are at the office. But especially when you are in confinement, all those rituals, all those things that we used to do regularly, Now it's a time of stress. We don't have to forget our rituals. Rituals are extremely important for peak performers. And if you don't have rituals, find something that you can do. Now, rituals have to be positive attitudes. You cannot say, okay, I am going to stop smoking and I'm going to go on a diet. That's not a ritual. For example, I am going to wake up in the morning between 8 and 8:30. I'm going to take a shower, and then I'm going to do a workout. That, for example, is a ritual. But you have to stick to those rituals. A lot of people say, oh my God, the news are terrible. Forget the workout. Give me a glass of whiskey, and now let me give you a cigarette. This is very important, that you have rituals, not only when you're in confinement, but in the office, in your personal life. But the key point is stick to your rituals and even exaggerate them in the toughest of the times. I don't know if that makes
Interesting.
sense.
Yeah, it makes completely sense, and I have also a curiosity with those politicians that you have been dealing and talking with them. Uh, do they have special rituals that you may share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I already mentioned that Sting does yoga and meditation
Mhm.
before he goes on stage all the time. But I had the chance to work with President Obama. That for me was the proof that all my Interpol pass has been set aside, because you got to go through a screening by the Secret Service, and if the Secret Service allowed me to work, very close to President Obama, that was great news. But I asked him before he went on stage. I said, Mr. President, what, I'm doing this, I'm writing this book. What rituals did you have when you were in the White House, or what rituals do you still have? And he said, it's very simple, Pancho. I used to wake up in the morning at 6:15 every day, provided there was no international crisis. I went down to the gym of the White House and I did a 45-minute workout. And then I went to have breakfast with my two daughters and Michelle. And I said, okay, a lot of people do that. So, but here's the key, Pancho. Remember this: no social media, no mobile phone, no newspapers, because that, going back to sources of information, that immediately is going to distract you from your goal, and you're not going to be able to give quality time to your daughters. And because he told me, he said, if something really important was going on in the United States or around the world, trust me, my aides or the Secret Service would have advised me. So that's a little anecdote I can relate to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's nice. That's nice. So we have a couple of questions here that came in. So one question is, Pancho, what role you believe that plays helping your neighbors, friends, or whoever in need, despite the social distance, will relieve the stress? Aren't we sensing the real humanity through the social ritual with each others?
You know, solidarity is the name of the game. If we do not become better human beings with one another, we are not more kind with people that might be suffering, and if we don't help each other, this situation is going to take much longer time to solve. Here in Spain, although it's probably one of the countries that have been affected the most, it's really rewarding to see that every night at 8 p.m., people go out to their windows and their balconies just to clap the sanitary personnel, the policemen, the armed forces, the people, cleaning the hospitals, all the public services. And you have seen really, really nice gestures of solidarity. I think what you have mentioned in that question, it's the key for all of us overcoming this solidarity.
Good. And so also there's a question before we go a little bit deeper in some techniques that you will share with us. I didn't mention before, but I know that you've been involved in the wine industry, well, and wine related seminars as well. And one question that came up from Larry Whitted is, what wine should we drink in confinement? Any suggestions?
I unfortunately I've been drinking a little bit more than usual, but basically I have the following philosophy with wine. The best wine in the world is not the most expensive; it's the one that gives you more pleasure. So a nice bottle of wine, with your wife or your spouse and your family. It's a great moment to come together, but try to avoid from talking negativity and being very tragic about it. Make the most of that moment. Wine is a great lubricant of a nice conversation.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. So now you talk a lot about balance in your book and in your seminars. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, about what balance is? What's your concept of balance?
Balance is something beautiful because it's very rare. Perfect balance in life, we can only achieve it at very specific times. But when you find that perfect balance, it's a tremendous moment of joy that allows Rafa Nadal to perform at his best, that allows maybe Hamilton to win Formula One Grand Prix, because every top performer, every Nobel Prize winner, every world leader who I have interviewed or that I have met, they all told me that their best moments in performance coincided when moments where everything was going well in their lives. Now, I describe balance as a table of four legs. You can see in the slide, first of all, you have the physical balance, which relates to physical energy. Physical balance is your health, it's what you eat, it's the hours of rest and sleep. That is physical balance. Second, it's mental balance. It's what you read, what you listen, your education, everything you do to improve yourself mentally. Emotional balance is a difficult one, but it's a very powerful source of energy because it involves everything that we love, our children, our spouse, our parents, our closest friends. We can be going through a perfect moment in life, but if something happens to my daughter or something happens to my wife, that is will end up affecting you. And last but not least is the spiritual balance. The spiritual balance is the one that makes us different from machines, for example. It's what allows people. Let me give you an example. I was reading the other day that there's this lady, a British athlete. She crossed the Antarctica on her own, walking in those temperatures completely on her own during 48 days. You gotta have a tremendous spiritual balance. Spiritual balance it's what takes the human race to the next level. Now, here's the interesting part about balance. This is the first time in history where all four balances of most citizens is being affected. Physical balance, because we're in risk of getting a disease that is called the coronavirus, but the confinement is affecting us. Emotional balance, because families are suffering. Mental balance, we are completely confused on what's going to happen with the economy, the information that we receive. And spiritual balance is difficult to find motivation and inspiration to do things when everything around you is going so wrong. And as I told you before, balance is a table of four legs. And if you give me the next slide, people will find this example, very, very useful. It's a table of four legs, and everything that's standing on top of the table are the things that you care the most: your relatives, your family, your friends, your job, your house, absolutely everything that you care for. Now, the key thing is not to try to achieve perfect balance, because that is it's very rare. The key is that stay always alert, that and be vigilant that those four legs, as soon as one of them starts shaking, you find the most appropriate remedy. And balance is what makes us perform at our highest level. Uh, During the coronavirus pandemic, we have to be even more alert because, as I said before, all those four legs are starting to shake.
And how about money? Where would you put money on those four legs that you mentioned? This is also something very important. And these days, there are many people that are losing their jobs and are very worried about money.
Money is the fifth leg of the equation, but I don't like to put it as a fifth leg, because we have to be able to achieve balance with the least possible money. However, if you want good health, you want to go to good gyms and you want to go to good doctors, you're going to need money. If you need to send your kids to a good school, you're going to need money. If you need to yourself, you want to do a master's, you want to do an MBA, you're going to need money. And sometimes to achieve great things in life, you need resources. So money surrounds everything in this economy that we have developed. We have given too much protagonism to money.
Okay, good. What kind of person could do in front of a severe and acute moment of stress? What advice could you provide? A specific technique that might be helpful for you in your experience, and something that every one of us could do in those situations. What can we do?
Definitely, it's breathing. And people say, "Oh yeah, well, Pancho is not telling me anything that I know." Well, maybe I'm not telling you everything that you know, but do you do it? Do you put it into practice? Now, when I have had real moments of stress, when I've learned that I was wanted by Interpol, I was stuck in an airport, Charles de Gaulle, retained by the police there, thinking, "Oh my God," I didn't know what a red notice was. They were talking about extradition. So imagine, I was under a lot of stress. And then many nights, I ended up looking at the ceiling. Weird thoughts were going through my mind. And in those moments, I've learned that breathing is the key way to change your chemistry and mentally. Think about the following. We can go 3 weeks without eating. We cannot go more than 3 days without drinking. We cannot live for more than 3 minutes without breathing. That's just to show you how important breathing is, because our brain feeds on oxygen and a little bit of sugar, glucose. Now, if because of the stress, our respiration gets affected, our biochemistry gets affected. When you start hyperventilating, that means that you have a shallow respiration. You're going to start exhaling a lot of CO2, which is the substance that triggers the response of breathing. So first of all, you got to learn to breathe. And there's a full chapter in my book and in my seminars about breathing. But summarizing it, when you are in a relaxed situation, you gotta breathe through the nose. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. That's number one. It's gotta be diaphragmatic. That means that it's deep breathing, not shallow breathing. You have to prevent hyperventilation. And when you are under a real moment of stress or you want to go to sleep, you do what I call the 4-8-8. Basically, you inhale counting to 4, you hold your breath for 8 seconds, you exhale for another 8 seconds. You breathe normally a couple of times, then you do it again, and you do it again. And you have to be, for example, I've learned that by lying on my back in bed, totally relaxed, not in a weird position, with temperature a little bit on the low side, and then you start doing this breathing exercise that induces your sleeping. So that for me is, mothers are very knowledgeable. I used to be very bad tempered. That's why I never was a great tennis player. My mother, when I lost my temper, used to say, "Panchi, breathe in, breathe deep, and count to 10." And that is the best advice that a mother can give you, because that is what helped me to go through. When I was in the middle of nowhere in South Africa thinking, "Oh my God, where do we go? I have no idea where I am." And I started hyperventilating and my pulse was, 120 beats per minute. I started doing my respiration exercise because I needed to think clear. And that helped me a lot.
Something that it's interesting about breathing, for me at least, is every time I go to yoga or some exercise like that, when the teacher says, "Remember to breathe," always or most of the times I'm not breathing. So he's right and you're right. We have to remember to breathe, because sometimes we forget about that. So you mentioned before the four legs of the table and the balances, but could you elaborate a little bit more about the emotional balance and later to the spiritual balance? Because it might be similar, and people might see very same things maybe. So tell us about the emotional balance and how you differentiate that from the spiritual balance.
Emotional balance is about family values. You know, you can draw tremendous energy that you could be capable of doing the most unbelievable things in order to protect your family. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, domestic violence has increased by 30% in France and by 28% in Spain. Because, you know, a lot of people, when they come home after a rough day at work, they take it up on their spouses. They think that your wife is your punching bag instead of somebody that, you know, can listen to you, give you advice, and give you energy, give you positive energy. So we have to see our family as something that, you know, not the shoulder to be crying on all the time, and not definitely not a punching bag. You know, your family has to be your number source of energy, because if you channelize well that energy, it can help you make unbelievable things. So during this pandemic, during this confinement, you know, you gotta find your space, even if it's in the same house. Take a break. For example, in my house, my wife goes to watch the television upstairs. I stay downstairs. She does exercise in the morning. I do exercise in the afternoon. But at night, we get together, we have dinner with the kids, we open a bottle of wine, and we share some time. You know, because I've learned that when we were under a lot of stress because of what happened with September 11 or with Interpol, the worst thing that we could have done is have a go at each other. So that's emotional balance.
And how about spiritual balance?
Spiritual balance is a very interesting source of energy, because it's what drives humans to become better. Evolution is based not only in knowledge, but in the capacity of someone believing that they can do better than they really think they can. You know, going back to Nelson Mandela, you know, how do you lead your players to perform better than what they really think they are? That is emotional balance. It's the emotions. It's when the people say, he played from the heart, or when somebody has an outstanding performance that you did not believe this person was capable of doing that, is because they are drawing from their emotions, from their emotional energy and balance. And I'm going to give you a little example. You know, I was very lucky, and still for me, going to the Olympic Games representing my country where I was born, in the city where I was raised, it's still the most emotional moment of my professional career. That was Barcelona 92. The only one day that I went to see the track and field, the athletics, I went to see a guy called Derek Redmond. Derek Redmond was a 400-meter dash runner, and he was supposed to win the gold medal. Nobody had questions about it. I went there because I wanted to see the man performing, but also we were curious about who was going to be number 2. If we can play this video, people will understand what I'm talking about. So that's Barcelona 92. The gun goes off. Derek is with the blue shorts. That's him. And 30, 40 meters after the race started, he has a cramp in the backside of his leg. So there you see, he's in tremendous pain, and he's limping, and the officials are going towards him to try to take him to the nursery room. He refuses to do that. Then now you will see his father. That is his father. Emotional support. He supports his son while he's crying because 4 years have gone out the window, and all his efforts to win a gold medal, he has to say goodbye to all that. And keep in mind that Olympics happen only every 4 years. He has to wait another 4 years, but he will be 4 years older. While he's crying, his father is accompanying him to the finish line, and 2 meters before the finish line, he tells Redmond, finish on your own. So this kid, limping, in pain, crying, crosses the finish line. The important thing about this story is, and tell us why emotional balance is so important, is because in life, we're going to go through tough times. And in business and in family, you will fall and you will have tragic moments. The important thing is we got to learn to stand up stronger and faster. You know, if the one, maybe I'm not rich, maybe I'm not a Nobel Prize winner, but the one thing that I am very proud is that, you know, unfortunately, I have been hit by 3 or 4 episodes in my life, but they didn't bring me down. With the support of my wife and my family, I managed to stand up, convinced that I was going to be stronger. And I want to emphasize this point because many of us are going to fall again. You know, never in my life, after what I've gone through, I imagined that in my existence I was going to witness what we're going through now. This is the worst thing that I have ever imagined it could happen to human beings. But we're going to have to stand up and raise to the occasion because we have no other solution. And this time, leadership is in the hands of the people. We have a tremendous lack of leadership around the world. And the only way to compensate that leadership is by us becoming small leaders at home, in our businesses, and come together. Like the gentleman said before, solidarity is what's going to make us better. And that's emotional balance.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And we also have Renee is saying here, the strongest way to cope with personal stress is to care for others.
Yeah, you know, we didn't touch in endorphins. If you think we have time to explain about
Yes, sure,
endorphins?
sure.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
endorphins is something that I have always used as a way to counteract bad moments. Endorphins, I relate very closely to endorphins because my father spent his whole life. He was a doctor, anesthesiologist, specialized in giving anesthesia to ladies before they went into labor. He thought he had the following rationale. You know, if women have been giving birth for thousands of years without anesthesia, without epidural, you know, there must be something in the human body that helps them go through this very painful moment. So I was helping him for 4 summers, taking samples of blood of patients that were, uh, as soon as they started having contractions to give birth, we started taking blood samples every 30 minutes. You know, after 4 years, he found certain substances that coincided with the construction, and those were endorphins. Endorphins are it's substances produced by your brain, but it's morphine. Morphine is the strongest painkiller in the world, and it's produced by your body. It's legal and it's cheap. Now, when I was coaching tennis, I thought about the following: there must be other ways to release endorphins because they're also called um, pleasure hormones. And I found out that you can release endorphins by doing exercise. You know, if you know, I think we have a slide. Here's a slide. You know, the brain on the left. This is a scanner. The area in green, that is the pleasure area of the human brain. Because it's green, it shows that it's completely inactive in a guy that has been sitting down, a typical couch potato. The image on your right, the same area is in red and orange. That means it's active. And that shows us that something is being produced that stimulates the pleasure zone of the brain. So exercise is one of the best ways to release endorphins. I strongly recommend people that even if you are in a very small apartment during confinement, find time and find the place to do burpees, you know, sit-ups, push-ups, but do at least 1 hour of, even if you know, in my apartment right here, I have a lady that in her small terrace, every day she's made an effort to walk from one corner to another of her terrace during 1 hour. Another way to release endorphins and therefore fight stress, it's like this gentleman very well said, it's helping each other. Charity, solidarity. A lot of people do it because they think it's the right thing to do. But a lot of people do it and they found tremendous pleasure. The scientific explanation to charity is that helps you release endorphins. Food is extremely important. You know, you have television programs about food. There's a lot of celebrity chefs. There's a lot of TV programs. There's recipes in every magazine. And we all get together. Thanksgiving, we have dinner. Christmas, we have dinner. You want to take out a girl on a date, you take it to a restaurant because food releases a tremendous amount of endorphins. But be careful what you eat. You know, those endorphins has to be, you have to eat in balance, things that give you pleasure, but don't abuse of certain substances. Another way to release endorphins is sex. And during difficult times in a couple, the first thing that goes out the window is sex. And sex equals love. It doesn't have to be necessarily sex, but romancing each other. You know, my wife and I have gone to the terrace every single night. Sometimes we talk too much about the virus, but there's always a moment to hold hands and to say I love you, or to have a nice gesture, because sex and love release a tremendous amount of endorphins. But the most powerful force on earth to release endorphins is laughter. If you laugh, you cannot be angry. If you laugh, you cannot tell someone off. So find a moment. And it's interesting that during this pandemic, the ingenuity of human beings producing all these very funny memes and little clips that really make you laugh and help you go through this, this ordeal, because laughter is the most powerful force to fight stress and endorphins in general.
Oh, great! That those were great tips. I'll try to have a little bit of everything every day. That will help us a lot. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Pancho, for your advices and for sharing these experiences with us. We got the time limit. We wanted to keep it 1 hour for our audience here. I think we were answering all the questions. So if you have anything that you would like to add, Pancho, before we close
Yeah,
this.
I would like to say a few closing remarks. Juan Carlos. First of all, I want to thank the U.S. Spain Chamber of Commerce and the people that are listening from South Africa to the Canary Islands, and I hope my family in Italy, they have gone through a very rough time, are also listening. But I would like to say one thing. To overcome this pandemic, we need, as I said before, solidarity and mostly resilience. Resilience is, to develop thick skin, and we don't have any other choice. We're gonna have to become more resilient, because until a vaccine is made available, we cannot go back to the normality that we used to know. So we are, up to a tough enemy and a very long run. This pandemic has evidenced how fragile our sanitary and social system, but especially our economic model is. We need to change the way we think. We need to change the way that we behave with one another and between countries. It's going to be our attitude more than our aptitude, which will allow us to overcome perhaps the most challenging issue that our society has ever experienced. I for many days I was posting every night the following post. My friends, if you're listening to me, please stay healthy, stay positive, stay strong, but stay at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pancho. Thank you. We have a very interesting webinar today. This has been recorded and we will forward it to you in a few hours. So if you can share with people or watch it again, you're free to do so. You can also follow Pancho through social media. Also his email, you can see those in the screens right now. And if you would like to order his book, Inspírate, you can order the digital version through Amazon since the paper version run out. And without further ado, thank you so much, Pancho, again for sharing these moments with us. We hope that we can have you again in the future here at the Chamber. Thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone joining us today.
Thank you, Juan Carlos.
Take care and stay at home.